But of course, yes, this is going to be my Illuvials tier list here, patch 1.12. I'm going to start from tier 0 and slowly but surely move my way up. And the first one, I mean, if anybody's been tuning in into my streams over the last couple of weeks as I've been covering Illuvium, I'm going to put in a spoiler right here, right now. There is only one F, and in fact, I am just going to call and rename it as it is. It is the Fliish tier. The Fliish, as cute as it is, I love the design and whatnot. I think it's really, really cute and silly. The Fliish is a scion that basically shoots off the laser beam, or like it takes a long time. It charges its laser, it fires it off, but it's such a short duration. It doesn't stay out for very, very long at all. And it hits whatever's in front of it first, and once it hits its target, it doesn't go any further. It does not pierce through. So what I oftentimes find is that because the Fliish has such a short duration, it ends up firing its beam into a tank, and then it takes so long to actually charge the beam again that even if you are a stage 2 Fliish going up in the early game against a couple of like strictly stage 1s, you still lose. It feels really useless right now, and I know they're probably a little bit nervous of trying to make it good because the side effect of the beam is that whatever it hits takes more damage. So I get what they're trying to go for, where once the beam's on a target, hopefully your other Illuvials are focusing the same target, so you kind of burst it down, but it never, ever really comes out that way. So the Fliish is the only one that's going to be in the F tier. It's got a tier all by itself. Next would be the Doka. I have an Exalted Fire Doka here. I am going to be putting this into D tier. It does fall off extremely quickly if you don't give it items or don't have it as a stage 3. Like even in a game earlier today, I did manage to have, I think it was a stage 3 Earth Doka, and I kept that thing actually for a pretty decent amount of time, like going into the mid game, because normally I would sell off my Dokas or get rid of them off the field as soon as I could. I had a couple of attack damage items and I gave it to the stage 3, and it did hold its own, but you had to heavily invest in a relatively weak Illuvial. Like as soon as I got a Rypter, for example, as soon as I got the Scorpion, like I immediately got rid of the Doka and then just put all the items onto the Rypter. Like, but again, it's not completely useless compared to like the Fliish. Next one I'm going to take a look at is going to be the Atippo. I'm going to throw the Atippo into D as well, probably to the surprise of nobody, because its ability, of course, being able to fire off a shield over a relatively decent distance around it. It's not terrible. Its attack speed and attack damage is just so weak. If you ever get into an instance where it's a one-on-one, where it's your Atippo versus pretty much anything at even health, you will lose. The one thing that is nice about the Atippo, at least, and I'll actually say this to the Doka as well, if you do bond your ranger to it, you immediately get a class buff, basically. So whether it's the 2 fighter buff for the Doka or the 2 empath buff for the Atippo, so you do give your team that extra shield every couple seconds during the fight. So that is nice. Other than the shields it would provide, and you have to dedicate your ranger's bond to it, it's pretty weak, unfortunately. So people might then ask, like, okay, so if you can bond and get the 2 fighters or the 2 empaths, can't you just bound the Fliish as well and get the 2 scions? Yes, but the thing is the 2 scions just doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything in terms of extra damage. The amount of extra damage you get for 2 scions is so negligible. It doesn't make a difference whether or not the Fliish can actually take out a target or not, because again, its beam is just too weak. That's why in D, you'll see Doka and Atippo. Meanwhile, Fliish is down by itself in F. Looking for the Grokko. So this one, compared to the others, I'm actually going to bump this one up into C. Now, personally, if I have what I would believe is like my mid-game to late-game team, and I have a Fliish still on it, I have an Atippo on it, and I have a Doka on it, or like any of them, I feel bad. Like, I feel like I'm underpowered, and I feel like there's a problem. I don't get that same feeling with the Grokko. Like, if I'm going for my usual 5 bulwarks, for example, If one of them happens to be a Grokko, I'm okay with it because its AoE stun, being able to stun everything around it, is still a very, very valuable thing. Sure, it might not be necessarily the tankiest of tanks when it gets down to it, but for a tier 0 unit, it's actually so valuable and its ability is so good being able to stun things. So compared to the rest, it goes in the C to me. Wrapping things up here with our final tier 0. I think it would end up being the Volante. Not going in the Fliish tier, no, but let's see. I think I'm going to put it into C as well. I have seen people, especially when rogues were stupid prominent in the last couple of weeks, actually go for the Exalted, so the Stage 3 fully evolved version of the Volante. And like it does like some okay damage, it holds its own, but the fact that its ability not only has that spike of damage, but it has the silence attached to it, it requires some serious positioning, but if you can get that onto a critical target and stop it with a big silence, doesn't matter how much damage you're doing, a silence is extremely valuable. So especially with rogue compositions, like I can see the Volante being something that you keep around for a little bit longer, and there has been instances, at least personally, where I've actually kept a Stage 2 Volante on my bench regardless of what kind of composition I'm running, just in case I need something to go dive in and silence a target if I see a vulnerable opening. It does its job. It does its job all right. There's definitely others that do it better, but it's not bad by any means. I am going to start with the Kukka. The Kukka and its line, it is an empath, but it's also kind of a fist fighter, so it's in an odd position where even though it's an empath, it does do a pretty decent amount of damage, especially if you start leveling this thing up. I've seen people run away with games with the fully evolved Kukka, and they do have their opportunities to pop off. However, in the early stages, this thing just gets completely destroyed, like kicked to the bucket and just gets taken away. Sure, it has a stun, but you have to actually be alive to use it. And the thing is so dang squishy that I cannot put it any higher than C. In terms of like these heavy air compositions that do use it, you definitely want to have one. And if you happen to get into the position where you can item one like heavily, then all right. Like, I've seen it done. That's what this C tier is all about. It's like, okay, in the right condition, it can pop off. But an average everyday match, I cannot get this Kukka to work for the life of me. The Chucco or the Chucco line. So, with this bear, it's nice that it has the untargetable as a part of its ability. However, I cannot ever remember a game where I was frustrated because of the bear. It felt like a tiny bit of a nuisance, but it wasn't very scary. Like, this thing just gets popped even with the untargetable, like with the smoke screen. And I know personally I tried to use this a ton because I personally am a big fan of the Wildfire perk, or Wildfire Affinity. So I would try to roll for these, especially when I was first starting off, I'd try to roll for these a lot. And I could never find the value in them. So with that, the bear, the Chucco line, or the Chucco roll here, I'm actually putting this down into D. I again love the design. It's a kind of playstyle I want. But when most of the wildfires are all about being bunkered up, and the Chucco wants to jump in, there's a bit of an anti-synergy there that I just cannot comprehend. And I've never seen somebody really pop off at this thing. Next up is going to be the Appon. So the Appon, or Appon, however you want to call it. This thing, an empath, earth empath that just stays planted, fires off its ability that gives a bunch of additional damage to any of your allies that are inside of it. Meanwhile, it stuns everything and does a decent amount of damage to any enemies inside of it. This thing is basically core for anybody running some sort of magma composition, or like even just heavy earth with mud, for example. And you need this thing for Mystics as well. With Mystics, I don't really see a whole heck of a lot, to be honest. But with that, the Appon I'm going to put with B because it does its job. It does its job very well, but it's not necessarily something that you can splash into every composition. Like, I know personally I've tried to sometimes just have one on my bench that I could sub in to catch rogues. But the single stun, or I should say the single AoE, so that's kind of contradictory. But you're going to get the one stun off to everything around you. But that still isn't going to stop you from dying, at least personally. Like, say when going up against the Ramphi or the Ramphite. Having the Appon stun the Ramphite does not give you enough time to actually kill off the Ramphite or the Ramphi, even if everything else is targeting it. And even so, if you do manage to get the jump on, most players, at least as you start climbing the ladder a little bit, is smart enough to give it a little bit of extra HP. A little bit of extra health, of course, or have the one of the items that gives it the untargetable once it drops to like 40%. So either way, it's still getting its Omega ability off. So that prevents me from putting the Appon any higher. However, it is still very good at what it does. All right, the Axodon or the Atlas line might be the Pikachu of Illuvium, because let's be honest, the the Atlas is adorable. In terms of cuteness scale, it's an S tier. But in terms of the Axodon, of course, its ability being able to constantly pop a bubble shield onto itself, giving it better EHP or effective HP because it's constantly throwing up that shield. With the extra splash damage, the only problem for me personally, like if you're trying to go into like a heavy water composition, the Axodon doesn't feel like enough. You need to have the bowl with it. You need the Cardelox with it. Even then, it still feels like you're so squishy. You have to play so carefully. Trying to get Tsunami, for example, is so difficult as well, because other than the Axodon, the only other thing that gets it is the Ebb line, or the Geyser. Yeah, it's just the Geyser itself, so trying to get that is actually extremely difficult. If you do manage to get it, though, you're popping shields like crazy. So I've seen some people bind their Ranger with a water Alluvial while they have a water item, and be able to take advantage of that. And to be fair, the Axodon does do some decent damage and has a little bit of extra health, but it takes a little bit to really get it running properly. I'm gonna put it into the B slot. It does its job well, but I've never went into or came out of a game and said, gosh, I just don't know how to deal with that Axodon. Do I just put it right next to it, or do I go into A? Because getting the Colossus on this thing and being able to make this thing viable with the later game tanks is actually pretty crazy. So I think I'm actually gonna bump it into A, and having the AoE taunt, especially if you get some of the imprints or the augments that allow you to bulk yourself up. Because there have been many times where I've seen the Cardelox be the last thing on the board, even though it's been getting wailed on the entire time. Just because somebody threw a ton of items on it. Especially if you do manage to get the resistances. If you have 5 bulwarks and you have the thing where you gain resistances based off of how many units are targeting you, and then you use your ability where you taunt everything at you, that is actually pretty strong. So I think I will put Cardelox in A. Next up will be the Tatopee line, so the Seaforest here in this instance. One of my favorites, personally. Just love the snail as a caster. Getting it early as a Tatopee isn't even necessarily that bad. The only thing is that it does take a long time to charge up that ability. However, when you do get it off, there are some pretty clutch scenarios too, since when you're charging up to actually fire it, you do get a little bit of damage reduction. So I've seen Tatopees, Tiantis, and the Sephoruses clutch up some very, very close scenarios because they happen to be in that damage reduction state at the right time. So personally, In terms of its damage, especially if you throw a couple items on this, it is pretty decent. Until you at least get your heavy late game mages. And the Tianti in particular, then Sephoris, is an enabler for the Goliath to get that granite invulnerability affinity. So I'm going to put it into B because it does its job well. There are many things that do it better, but it has that extra perk because it enables Earth teams and it enables Granite. The Grilla. This thing is a bugger. The fact that this thing almost guaranteed, no matter what, can single out a squishy. Any of your mages, any of your healers or whatnot, because it targets based off of your, I believe it's either your resistances or HP, but either way, no matter what, it finds a way into the back line to go for those targets. You could have the tightest bunker possible. No matter what, everything kind of moves ever so slightly. This thing will find a way in. You put items on this thing, you're almost guaranteed to take out one, maybe two of your opponent's units. And then the taunt from the clone this thing leaves behind has screwed over my Scions so many times that oddly enough, this might... Oh, I'm kind of torn. I'm low-key debating on throwing the Grilla into S, but no, I think I'll put it with A. Might be too early still to fire off an S, but the thing is so good still. It's very strong for just a tier 1. So Rota, Revo, Gyro. It gets into a spot where I don't think, as much as I've played up against rogues, especially over the last couple of weeks, never once have I seen, oh, if I could only deal with this damn Gyro. It's kind of just nonchalant in the background, shooting away, and then 9 times out of 10, this thing just kamikazes into the team and dies. Especially, I don't know what it is about Ramfies and Ramfights or whatever with Gyros, but it feels like Gyros are just, have some sort of magnetic pull to Ramfights as they're ulting. And these things just die immediately. I'm putting Gyro into D. This thing, I hardly ever see find true value. Maybe if you have a Revo in the early game, like, okay, you can put on some decent pressure. But even then, I still don't want it unless I'm going for air. Or I'm going for dust. Then, okay, I'm going to keep it just specifically because of the affinity in the class, but otherwise, I'm staying away from this thing. This thing is weird. This is where skill issue comes into play, because if I understand this correctly, Riley almost kind of feels like a bit of a supportive fighter, in the sense that it heals a little bit and then gives additional attack speed, which if you're running other fighters, is a buff. However, I've seen way too many people actually throw a ton of items on this thing and still do good damage. That on top of the fact as well that this does eventually, as the Riley specifically, turn into a shock. There is some value keeping the Riley, so I'm going to put it into B tier. It's not as much of a nuisance as, say, the Cardalox or the Grilla, but I've seen these things pop off. Classic case of the dad being kind of held back by his kid here. Like, if you want to truly get full effect of the T-Roo line, you need to make it so that as the parent jumps in, you need to have the Joey or the cub or whatever you want to call it, the baby, near your team so it gets the buff when its Omega ability goes off. But this thing is a shock style, which means if you're running shock, you're probably running mages and you're probably bunkering it a little bit. And if you're running the T-Roo in a bunker, it means you're probably diving in directly into the enemy team and just dying immediately. So honestly, the only thing good about the T-Roo line is the fact that it's a Revenant and it has shock. This thing is an affinity filler. If it wasn't for its affinity, it would be down in the Fliish tier for me personally. And tier 2 is just dedicated strictly to Lynxes. And I tell you what, if the Leviathan tournament and the tournaments afterwards, all of them recently, have taught me anything, It's how actually godlike lynxes are. Even just the regular lynx itself packs an okay punch when it's not even evolved. But it feels like almost no matter which form you have, the lynxes end up being one of the best units on your board. Off here with the Bulwark version. So the Bulwark Lynx, or the Stoic Lynx in particular, I have the Earth version, but this goes to any of the versions because they can be in any nature. This thing basically has the same ability as the Grokko, but it's much tankier and it hits for a wider range. And throwing even just like one item onto this thing almost makes it feel unkillable. Not quite to like the level of like some of these like top tier tanks, but it can carry your front line by itself if it had to. I'm putting it into A tier without question. And oddly enough, I think this is the fighter this time. Quickly taking a look. Yeah, I made sure to get different affinities so I can actually tell which one's which. But the fighter Lynx. So again, it just does. This one does stupid damage, but yet it still keeps the tankiness. And it just hits like a truck. I can't downplay this Lynx. So again, it's going into A tier because once you get into the later tiers of units, there are some that do it a little bit better in terms of DPS, but it is super strong. Same thing with the Rogue. If you manage to be playing a Rogue team, this ends up being one of the tanks for that squad. If you're not playing a Rogue team, screw it, you have a very strong distraction that could still take things out by itself if you had to. If you're playing like a balanced composition, this could still find great effect. So once again, A tier. This is where I'm going to change things up though. Not every Lynx is A tier. I've got the Scion Lynx. This thing hits like a truck, however, trying to get it to actually hit its ability on the right targets, because this thing shoots in a very wide, like a wide radius, but it targets the thing that's in front of it, or targets the thing that it was originally targeting, instead of targeting the opponent that's the furthest away, like other alluvials with similar abilities. So there are many times where if something is jumping on this, on the Scion Lynx, that it shoots it to the side or shoots it at an angle where it only hits one thing when it can clear out entire teams if it's angled properly. Because that can be so heavily manipulated, I'm going to put it into B. Because when it works and it actually targets well, it can single-handedly swing a game. But it is so easily manipulated, it makes it very inconsistent. I have to put it down a notch here compared to its other Lynx brethren who are just consistently good. The very first match I ever broadcast, I was taking part into some Virtuous or the Empath Lynx slander. I slandered the hell out of this thing, saying like it's not one of my favorites, that I do not like it, that its ability of just healing missing health was too weak. And on that front, I still do kind of believe. Like, I've seen many people now go for this Virtuous Lynx and be able to survive way longer because when they get knocked low, the Lynx heals for more, so it holds its own pretty decently. What I'm now learning as I'm watching more and more tournaments and watching more and more gameplay is that people are basically frontlining with this thing, because one thing I never took into account is that it also does damage based off of the opponent's missing health. So it almost does like a little bit of an execute damage. So because of that, on top of it being tanky, on top of it being empath as well, this thing is extremely flexible, extremely good. It is going into A tier. Part of me even kind of wants to move it up one more. I think I'm still going to keep it at A, but I might come back to it because this thing surprised me. And one thing I say constantly, I do not mind being wrong because it means I learned something. The Lynx is Exhibit A for that. Another tier 1 that it looks like I have forgotten is the Monkier line. So of course this thing doesn't actually have an ability. What just ends up happening is every 3 hits it does a shockwave behind the target that it hits. And it does an area of effect damage behind it. So optimally you want to load this thing up with attack speed. So obviously it becomes perfect for a fighter team. But I have never, ever seen an instance of the Exalted Monkier or a Greater Monkier or Monkiers in general being problematic. They're always just kind of there. Even when it has items, it feels like it just dies. It needs to be left alone, unhindered, and just swinging away at all times to find any value. And I just do not like the Monkier. This is going down to D. I'm sure it gets picked up for the mud affinity and whatnot, but just never ever seen it really pop off. I've also, how did I forget my favorite guy of all time in the tier 1s? Archelion. Basically the staple for any bunker composition, but I've also seen this thing used in front lines, itemed up, to basically be a bulwark, even though it's not actually a bulwark. This thing's an empath. But being able to have that ability that just has the big circle of healing over time around it can really help mitigate a lot of the random stray shots that come into your backline. Or if you have this thing paired up in the front line, keeping your tanks alive, especially early game, like I've seen a lot of people favor Archelion lately, and I definitely understand why. Especially if you're playing a bunker composition, and you manage to get that one item, whether it's the Life Storm, where everything around you heals over time, or the item that gives you mitigation to everything around you over time. If you happen to get multiple of those, things that should be a squishy and die quickly just don't die. So Archelion, you are the core of the bunker composition. You are an A tier. Oh, Vermillia, Vermillier. This thing is such a pain without actually realizing it's such a pain, at least to me personally. This thing's supposed to be one of the tanks for the rogues, but it still packs a fantastic punch while also neutering your Omega power. And if you happen to have Revenant up to tier 4 or level 4, also then reduces attack speed. Decent AoE damage while being a massive disruptor, while also being rather tanky. This is going to be my first S, even still after the nerf to Revenant. It is just too damn good. I could have a little bit of recency bias from the last patch, but I still see this thing and I die a little on the inside. The Komodo Dragon line, so Headi, Krunk, and Blotto. So this thing's ability, of course, as a bulwark, so this is one of your tanks, does manage to also be a wildfire as well, so we do kind of see these very, very frequently as a part of bunker compositions, but just its ability by itself kind of makes it splashable into other compositions because it fires off a smoke screen that blinds everything around it. And with the rogues being rather prominent, fighters being rather prominent right now, it is almost never a bad idea to have a Blotto. If I was ranking this specifically from left to right on A, I'd probably put this at the top of A, but I'm not doing that. So I'm just probably going to end up putting Blotto into A tier. One of the best tanks out there, especially for early tiers. You do manage to enable that wildfire affinity as well, get enough items onto the Blotto so that it stays around for a long time. Really make use of that wildfire proc. It is just so good. So the A Sarktace Monarch line, the AC-130s as I would call them during broadcasts. Ability just carpet bombing into the opposing team, the target furthest away. And then having most of its damage, at least personally, I feel like most of its damage comes from auto attacks. The only time I've ever really seen the Monarch in particular pop off, it is because somebody stacked a bunch of items on it where it was the do more damage after hitting a shield. So it would do its carpet bomb, obviously hit like one or two shields while doing so, then land and then immediately hit like a truck. And even still, I still find it like a little bit underwhelming compared to the other things here. I am probably going to end up putting Monarch into C tier. It is nice that the Arctace does give you early access to the Inferno affinity. So you pair the Monarch up with the Ranger, for example, or while it has a fire item to get a very, very early Inferno. But even then, Inferno I find is a little bit underwhelming as an affinity. But because the Arctace can be encountered so early, and you can get to the Inferno proc early, that's why I'll put Monarch into C compared to D. Okay, the Winq line. Can't sleep on its damage, and you definitely can't sleep on its ability. Charming the two targets furthest away from it is an absolute nightmare for Scions, or anybody with a bunker composition. Can really make their life rough. However, I do feel like people are appropriately figuring out how to play around this thing now. And otherwise, you're just using this as an empath, and it's 100% going to be on your squad if you're going for air, if you're going for dust. But otherwise, it's nowhere near as dominant as it used to be, to say the least. I feel like we used to see these splashed onto basically every single team. Not so much anymore. It does its job well, but I wouldn't put it any higher than B, at least personally. Slashing, slapping, stabbing, whatever it happens to be. The Penguin. The Penguin Rogue. The amount of times in tournaments have really opened my eyes to this thing. Where it may be a stage, or no, a tier 3, but even as a stabbin, so the middle evolution, if you have items dedicated to attack and attack speed, this thing is a monster. I've seen it 1v5 teams and still sit at high HP. If you happen to get the item that makes your attack speed faster, but also gives you attack range to jagged something, I remember off the top of my head. But this thing, it comes ridiculous. When it pops an ability, it gets additional damage and additional range on top of that. So not only is it a rogue, it's probably a rogue that you cannot reach until your critical alluvials are already taken down. And by the time you flank it, it's still already wound up good to go, and it is going to wreck you. Slashing is an S to me. Okay, next up, the Rypter line. Scorpions. Fact that it has a very, very simple ability, of course. It just shanks you with its tail, but with how fast this thing is, how much damage it does, especially I've seen as of late Rip Lances just popping off. Easily blendable into a standard fighter composition, doesn't have to have anything to do with water. A lot of times, too, people will have the Cardalox on their team or Cardalo, so you already have the opportunity to go for Toxic, and just having that extra utility for the Riplance or the Rypterus or whatever you happen to be using, just having that extra Toxic proc is just so good. Throw this thing with items too. I've seen this thing become an absolute menace. I wouldn't call this S tier, but I would absolutely call it A tier, which I'm personally happy with. I love the look of this thing. I love seeing it there. I don't feel bad when I get killed by it, but I tend to get killed by it a lot. Gnarl. Okay, so this thing's ability, it fires off vines across the team to the two farthest targets. It can interrupt, which is nice. So again, just an absolute nightmare for Scions. But compared to other tanks, it does feel like it gets chunked much quicker, unless you are lucky enough to have the Verdant affinity with you, because it gets chunked extremely quickly down to half, but then the Verdant puddle comes through to try and heal you through. But even then, I tend to see Gnarls just get torn through. Even as, like, their fully evolved variant. They're good. They do what they need to do. But they tend to just get shredded, at least to me. Definitely has its use, but it's not really the star of your team. Oh, my Lura. Screw this thing. Seriously. Not only is it a rogue, it's a very, very tanky rogue, similarly to how the Vermillia is. And instead of neutering and disabling your team by attack speed and omega power debuffs, this thing charms you. So it stops whatever you're doing, makes it walk to you, or walk to it, then pops back out in an AoE area of effect slice across the entire squad in a relatively decent range. It's tanky, it does a ton of damage, it interrupts. I think we're kind of starting to see why rogues were pretty damn good. So that's 3 rogues in S tier right now. Let's start with the Mammoth. This thing is interesting. Part of me wishes it was a bulwark, because it kind of plays like a tank, even though it has a little bit of extra range compared to a standard tank. But its ability is so good. Being able to pick up an alluvial that's near it and yeet the thing into the opponent and then stunning anything around it is so good. I undervalued this thing so much for so long. Maybe to the point where I even overvalue it a little bit now, but I think Mammoth is God tier. Like S tier for sure. It can be one of your only hopes versus rogues. Don't want to deal with it, just yeet it out of the way. The fact that it could disrupt and stun multiple targets, it's just so good. So good. And the fact that it does, or it is a Scion instead of a Bulwark though, is pretty cool too, because it makes it so that if you don't necessarily have 2 strong Scions, in terms of like mages, that's okay. You could have a tanky Scion and then have 1 carry Scion. The Beyblade. Flare, Singe, or Sear. Of course, it is a tank, it's bulwark, but it is meant to kind of be a damage-dealing tank. Its ability being able to spin around like a battle top, like a Beyblade, and just do continuous damage across multiple targets is nice. But the big problem with it is that there are so many things in the game that can stop it from spinning that it just ends up being a standing meat shield. And while it does have a strong affinity, of course you do have the magma affinity attached to it, and it is a bulwark, so you want it for your 3 or 5 bulwarks. When it comes to strictly the ability itself with it, because it gets messed with so often, there's been times where I've definitely debated to myself, do I really want to keep leveling up the flare or my Singe, or throw my Grokko back in and have a consistent AoE stun? So yeah, this thing's going down into C tier for me. I love its design, I love the way it plays, but it gets screwed with way too much. If anything, it's in an enabler, again, for another alluvial, which happens of course to be the Phyri, the Pyrox, or the Scoriox. So of course this thing is also of the magma affinity. But this thing, it's nice and simple. It doesn't have a big old nuke as an ability. This thing just sits in your backline and shoots as fast as possible. Constant, safe, consistent damage. As long as you don't get stunned or charmed, you will be doing damage no matter what. You get silenced, it really does not matter. You're just auto-attacking. Like, sure, its ability gives it a little bit of extra attack speed and a little bit of extra damage, but you can live without that and just keep shooting. And especially with some of the compositions I've been seeing as of late, where we're putting, like, Verdant Wildfire Bunker mixed with Scoriox, it is actually extremely scary However, it's not necessarily splashable to me. Like, you have to dedicate to playing Protect the Carry. Classic Protect the Kog'Maw kind of style for those League fans out there. Protect the AD carry as much as possible, because yeah, if you do it, you're successful, but if this thing gets taken off the board quickly, you've lost all value. So I'm gonna put it into A, because what it does extremely well, but it has vulnerabilities that can prevent it from getting its full value. Compared to the rest of these S tiers, that either they just have to have one ability go off, and they've already found value to the fight, or they're so elusive that no matter what, they're consistently finding value in the fight. The Dash, Rake, or Umbre, or Umber, however you want to call it. So this is another water rogue, but this one is more so aligned with the steam composition. Does not tend to be the standout when it comes to the rest of the rogues. Yes, it has that untargetable by going into its smokescreen mode and then doing a ton of damage to a couple of the units around it. So finding decent damage with this, the Umber, or the Dash line, is a pretty safe bet. It usually does not fall before getting at least one Omega ability off. But you have to load this thing with items to really get serious effectiveness for it. And even then, I feel like you need Steam as well to keep buffing it over time to really find super effectiveness. So meanwhile, compared to something like, say, the Penguin, I have it up in the S tier. The Penguin, no matter what, is doing damage based off of its auto attacks. And it finds a way to stay safe from range where it's usually never really targeted. Meanwhile, the Rake tends to jump in by itself. It has to be point blank. Sure, it briefly goes untargetable, but very rarely do I really see it pop off and get the opportunities that, say, the Penguin does. So this thing is still good, but you need a few more things to kind of back it up. There's been many times, I know at least personally, where if I'm playing my Steam style, where I've put this thing in and given it a couple of items, and it still feels like it's in like maybe the middle of my team's damage charts. So I'm gonna be putting the Umber into the A tier. It is good, but it's a little less consistent. Okay, the Ebb line. The only other tsunami in the game outside of the Axodon. This thing does not attack at all. It just sits pretty, takes damage, and eventually spits rain across the entire field, which hits both ally and enemy, hurts the enemies, heals the allies. For a very, very small amount, it can sometimes supplement a bunker composition. What I know I personally like to do if I happen to have one of these around is for all those alluvials that shoot the furthest thing away from it, I will purposely make it so that it attacks the Ebb or the Geyser, whatever it happens to be. I'll make it so that it attacks this instead, so it charges its ability faster, and in turn heals the team faster. But other than just kind of being a target and a beefy target, it feels like a bit of a dead weight to me. Like, if you're going for water, if you're going for empaths, yeah, you're probably having it. It does have some use in regards to retargeting, but it's going into the C tier for me. It has its one specific niche, and that's really it. And even then, you can get away with not having an Ebb on your squad. Jotun, so the bear. If there was any counter to the rogues in the last patch, it was fighters, and specifically, it was the polar bear line. There'd be a lot of players that I would see jack this thing up with items, especially if it happens to get power ascent, or like I don't know if it doubles, but it gives it a ton more damage amp, it gives it a ton of damage reduction, as well as a ton of damage amplification for itself. The unstoppable polar bear was truly devastating. And a lot of times, like, you would need the team that focused it extremely quickly, but of course the player playing this composition is going to know that, so they position it properly. And it almost felt like there was nothing that you can do versus this thing. So with that, I think the Polar Bear's S. Okay, last one for tier 4. We do have the Blazonite line. You manage to get the Blazonite, you do get access to that Wildfire perk, which does go alongside a bunker composition quite nicely. So if you do manage to have the Ranger, the Blotto, and the Blazonite on your team, that is pretty devastating for consistent damage and consistent healing to yourself. And it's again one of those ones similarly to the Kukka, where it may be an empath, but it does a ton of damage still. And not to mention its ability itself being able to shoot the furthest thing away, but it travels through the entire team, and if something was casting while it was flying through, it does disrupt the cast. So say if Fliish was charging and firing its beam, nope, it's getting disrupted. The Sephorus was winding up for a shot, nope, not happening. It gets the disruption in. Shout out to everybody who remembers when the Blazonite's ability used to stun. Remember when that was the thing? That was broken as hell. But glad we don't live in those times anymore. But even still, between the damage and the utility, plus being the perfect fit in for a bunker composition, Blazonite, you're S tier to me. Starting off with the Deer, the Adoro. I feel like this thing was so much better before. You can splash it basically onto any team because its ability was that it just healed the lowest 3 targets, depending on an amount of its missing health. But I don't know if it got tuned down or what, but that heal feels like it barely makes a dent anymore, even from the Adoro stage. So I'm almost not as willing to splash it in as much as I used to. I wouldn't call it A. Like, yes, there's a time and place for it, and it's nice having a heal that does not require the bunker composition. So it does its job well, but it's definitely not a must-have like it used to be, at least in my opinion. Titanor. Now, of course, this thing does get enabled by TNT once it gets the granite affinity. And you throw some tanky items on top of this as well, it's for sure going to survive the first couple of seconds because of its invulnerability. But I've seen, I think I've even had a short that I posted recently about it, where a fully loaded Forus was wailing on this Goliath. It wasn't even the Titanor, it was the Goliath, and it couldn't kill it at all. The health bar basically did not move at all, to the point where the overtime damage came through and timed out the forest, basically. This thing just has, I think, probably the highest defenses and tank and health in the game, having the invulnerability. And then I didn't even go over its own ability, which of course shoots at the target furthest away from it, but it stuns every single thing that it hits. The tankiness on alongside the utility, I would be stupid to not put this thing in S tier. Alright, the Alfie line. This is personally, again, one of my favorite units. I love the fact of like a hydro pump kind of style ability. Goes through, unlike the Fliish, where the Fliish charges up, like takes a long time to charge up. It shoots its laser and hits the first target and it stops. No matter what, this one will go through every single target until it makes it to the target that's the furthest away from it. And it kind of goes one of two ways. You absolutely demolish everything in the line, or it's so damn tanky it might have not have just shot its shot even. There's been sometimes too, very similar to how the Arcane Lynx, the Scion Lynx is, where targeting can kind of screw you a little bit. People have gotten pretty good at playing around Alfies. As soon as they see it, they know, like, okay, I better put one of my tankier members at the very, very back, or make sure that the furthest thing away from it is not in the line of fire. So what I will say The Alfie line, this thing is absolutely a noob killer. But when you get to the higher levels, it does get played around much better. So very, very similar to, I think, the Adoro here. I'm going to put it down here because, again, the highs of the Alfie popping off are amazing. But the lows are just frustrating. Not to mention if you just get interrupted, and everybody's using Blazonite anyway, so it's probably, like, core enemy number 1 is probably Blazonite. Because it gets its beam interrupted over and over and over again. So it's good, and it's absolutely a noob slayer, but it's not as consistent as some of the other things on this list. One mage that is rather consistent, though, is the Squeeze line. So that's the Squeeze Octius, or this one that I'm holding here that I cannot even remember the name of because I hardly ever see it because everybody is going for it. The king or the queen of the Shock Affinity, with the ability that rains lightning onto the 2 lowest health targets, and the fact that you get to shoot it again if you can land a finishing blow is absolutely absurd. Especially if you can get it into its final form. Like, if you get it into Squeeze, or if you get the Squeeze, like, it's nice having the resets, but its damage isn't really that high. You get to the Octius, it's like, okay, now you're actually chunking. If you get the Stage 3 version that I'm holding right here, this thing one-shots things. Especially if you have other Scions with it and you're getting additional Scion perks. It takes a little bit of setup. You have to protect this thing like the Scoriox. But there are instances where the Octius can get jumped on, fire off one ability, still do enough damage for the rest of your team to win the fight. And that is going to be the difference maker between me putting this in A tier alongside the Scoriox and throwing it into S. The Foe line. So this, of course, is a Nature Arcanite or a Nature Fighter. It does have a pretty cool ability where it has a short-ranged area of effect in front of it that comes out extremely quickly. So anytime it fires it off, like maybe 2 or 3 alluvials wide of AoE damage depending on where it's pointing. This thing loaded up in the right circumstances can run away with a game. You give it Bloom as well if you happen to pair this up with like the Malura or something like that, and it's constantly buffing itself and healing itself. That's actually terrifying. One thing I've also seen extremely terrifying that I personally love, if you happen to get the Wildfire imprint and you put it on this thing, Wildfire procs every single time that you use your Omega ability, and this thing fires off its Omega ability so fast, so it spreads Wildfire so fast. And heals from it, which is just absolute insanity. But it is not a guaranteed thing. Like I've said earlier on, like I've seen Goliaths versus Forest, and the Forest just be completely walled by the Goliath. Victory or thing is not guaranteed. You have to position it properly, you have to be careful and aim loaded up with items. But it is still very good. I am going to put the Foe line into A. Last but not least, the Ramphy line. So that's your Ramphy, Ramp Fight, and Ramp Fire. So, easily the most polarizing ability in the entire game, where it jumps on in, jumps to the skies, and it has a gigantic area of effect that can just burst entire teams by itself. It is a rogue, of course, so it could dive in, and you optimally want to dive this thing into the middle of everybody. So yes, it can be turned on, yes, it can be focused. However, this thing has enough health right now that even if it jumps into an Appon, for example, gets taunted by a Carablu at the same, or like right after the fact, it probably still has enough tank at least at the ramp fight stage, that it can get its ability off, and that's all you need. You just need one. I've seen entire bunker compositions. I've had my entire bunker composition completely shredded, massive tank lines chunked down to half, healers and DPS one-shot. And the ramp fight didn't even get into the middle of my composition. Because that's the thing too, its range is so strong right now that even if you have a bunker composition and you push it off to like the right-hand side, if I'm in the corner, the ramp fight jumping up is still going to make it at least into the middle. So it's messing with my my Archos or my Archelion. It's probably taking a couple of my empaths with it. It's chunking my tanks, and God forbid if this thing did happen to sneak in maybe a little bit, walk into the bunker a little bit, it probably took out my Scoriox as well. Part of this is I know I'm terrible at positioning and I'm bad at the game. This thing is also very, very similar to the Alfie line, a Noob Slayer. But what makes it stand out compared to the Alfie line is not only is it a Noob Slayer, it still finds value in top play. It's not a matter of, oh, just stun it, forehead. Well, that's perfectly fine. Well, they itemize against it. Like I was saying before, a lot of times it's not very uncommon to see the ramp fight with the ability or with the item that makes it so that at 40% health it goes untargetable. Heck, in a short that I recently posted, I had the Granite imprint and I threw Granite onto the ramp fight so it dove into the middle of the team, was invulnerable, and it got its ability off for free. Like, what are you supposed to do against that? And just watch as your team gets melted away. Honestly, not only is Ramp Fight, or Ramp Fire, Ramp V S, I would argue if I was lining this up that it's probably best of the best, because while it is a little bit inconsistent in regards to, like, some people have gotten really, really good at trying to manipulate its pathing, I personally still think enough damage is done, even if it's hitting one or two targets, that it's just super, super strong. And with that, thanks for listening to me yap about Illuvials. This, of course, is just based off of patch 1.12. And this is all my personal opinion, of course. This is not the end-all be-all. This is not the mindset of a professional player. So please, of course, take this with a grain of salt, and if you want to discuss Illuvial's positioning and rankings, you're more than welcome to. But at least personally for today, this is where my mind's at.